What happens when a billionaire thinks he can get away with treating others like dirt? What if that same billionaire insults the wrong person, a black waitress who decides she's had enough? You won't believe what happens next. This is a story about power, privilege, and revenge, one that takes place in the kind of upscale restaurant where people go to feel untouchable. Meet Jasmine, a black waitress who has spent years serving all kinds of customers. Some are kind, others are rude, but there's one type of customer she's had enough of: the entitled, arrogant ones who think they can walk all over people like her. And then, one day, a white billionaire named Mr. Richards walks in. To him, the world is his playground, and everyone else is just there to serve him. He thinks he's above the rules, above respect, and above common decency. What he doesn't know is that Jasmine has a plan, one that's going to teach him a lesson he'll never forget. She's not just any waitress, and this is not just any insult. This is a story of how a small moment of disrespect can lead to something much bigger, and how a single act of revenge can shake the foundations of arrogance and power. Jasmine had been working at the restaurant for years, long enough to understand the dynamics between staff and the customers. She knew that when it came to high-end dining, there were always those who expected special treatment, those who thought their wealth and status gave them the right to treat people like they were invisible. Unfortunately, Jasmine had seen it all: the rude remarks, the condescending glances, and the whispered insults. But today, things felt different. Today, she would face someone who believed he was untouchable. Mr. Richards, the white billionaire, was exactly the kind of customer who gave her those familiar, sinking feelings. As he walked in with his entourage, his air of superiority was unmistakable. His tailored suit screamed wealth, and his stiff posture screamed power. Jasmine noticed how everyone else in the restaurant shifted to cater to him, how the staff stepped back a little further than usual, just to make sure he wouldn't be inconvenienced by a simple question. The kind of reverence some people would give to royalty. She tried not to let it bother her. It wasn't new. She had learned to push her emotions aside, to keep her smile locked in place, and to take orders from people who thought they could treat her however they pleased. But today was different. The way Mr. Richards looked at her, the way he barely acknowledged her presence, it was as if she was nothing more than a ghost in the room. The disrespect felt thicker than usual. When she walked over to take his order, Mr. Richards barely glanced up from his phone. Without even looking at her, he waved his hand dismissively and said, "Bring me your best wine, the most expensive one you have, and make it quick." His voice wasn't demanding, it was condescending, as though he was doing her a favor by giving her the chance to serve him. Jasmine didn't flinch. She had dealt with this kind of treatment before, countless times. But something inside her stirred. This wasn't just another customer. This wasn't just another wealthy man treating her like she was less than human. There was a sharpness to his words, an arrogance that stung more than it should have. When she returned with his wine, he didn't even bother to thank her. Instead, he tossed a handful of cash on the table, not even bothering to count it. "Keep the change. "Now, go back to doing your job," he said without looking her in the eye. It was a move designed to humiliate her, make her feel small, insignificant. Jasmine felt her blood begin to boil. Every fiber of her being wanted to snap back, to say something, to show him that she wasn't just some servant to be ordered around. But she knew better. She knew that reacting in anger wasn't going to change anything. That wasn't the kind of power she needed to wield. Jasmine decided she wouldn't let him win, not without a fight. But this time, she wouldn't fight the way he expected. Jasmine spent the next few minutes walking away from Mr. Richards' table, but the sting of his words and his dismissive behavior didn't fade. She could feel the tension in her chest, a tightening that made it hard to breathe. The words he'd said to her replayed in her mind, the way he'd treated her like she didn't matter. But as she turned to walk into the kitchen, she took a deep breath. She was going to stay calm. This wasn't going to get to her, not today. But the more she thought about it, the more it became clear. Mr. Richards wasn't just another entitled customer. He was a symbol of everything she had experienced in her life, the way people like him walked through the world, assuming they could get away with anything because they had money, power, and privilege. Jasmine had seen it time and time again in the restaurant business, but never in such an overt, arrogant way. She knew something had to change, and maybe, just maybe, today was the day. Jasmine's mind raced as she went about her work. She knew she couldn't just let it go. This wasn't just about a rude comment or an insult. It was about standing up for herself and for every person who had ever been treated like they were invisible, like they didn't matter. She couldn't let him get away with it, not without making him feel the weight of his actions. Her mind started to formulate a plan. She had learned over the years that sometimes the best way to take control of a situation was by remaining calm and letting the other person dig their own hole. Jasmine wasn't going to get emotional. She wasn't going to shout or make a scene. No, she was going to outsmart him. As she walked back to the dining area, she found herself moving with a sense of purpose. Her interactions with Mr. Richards had been brief, but something had shifted. She wasn't going to walk away like she always did, head down and accepting the disrespect. This time, she was going to make sure he knew exactly who he was dealing with. The restaurant was bustling as usual, but Jasmine's focus was sharp. She was aware of every detail around her, the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the faint sound of silverware being set down on tables. But in her mind, all she could think about was Mr. Richards. How could she get back at him? What would make him understand the arrogance of his behavior? What would make him realize that no one was above respect? Jasmine knew that it wasn't just about the insult. It wasn't just about him treating her like a servant. It was about the larger issue, the way people like him thought they could treat others without consequences. Jasmine wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for anyone who had ever been belittled or made to feel small. She had spent years quietly tolerating the jabs, the snide remarks, the way people like Mr. Richards looked at her like she was less than them. Today, that was going to end. As she reached the table, she paused for a moment. She could feel the eyes of the other diners on her, but she didn't let it faze her. This was the moment of truth. She wasn't just going to serve him this time. She was going to make him think twice before ever treating anyone like that again. And for the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt a sense of power she hadn't known she had. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who had control over her own story. The moment had arrived. Jasmine approached Mr. Richards' table with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She took a deep breath before speaking, keeping her face calm, her body language steady. As she walked over, she could feel the energy in the room shift, as if everyone around her sensed something was about to change. But no one knew exactly what. Mr. Richards looked up from his phone, barely acknowledging her presence. His smug smile was still there, but it faltered just slightly when Jasmine spoke. "Mr. Richards," she began, her voice calm but firm, "there's an issue with your payment." He blinked, not expecting this. He quickly brushed off the comment with a dismissive wave. "I already gave you more than enough. There's no problem." His tone was condescending, a hint of irritation already creeping in. Jasmine didn't back down. "Actually, there is," she replied, her voice steady but carrying an undeniable authority. She placed the receipt in front of him, pointing to a small, almost unnoticeable detail that he had overlooked. A minor discrepancy on the bill that most customers wouldn't have noticed, but that Jasmine had spotted immediately. It was a charge for an item he hadn't ordered, something that could easily be corrected, but would cost him a significant amount of money. Mr. Richards glanced at the bill and frowned. "That's a mistake," he muttered, brushing it off like it was nothing. But Jasmine wasn't done. She kept her gaze steady, not letting him brush her off this time. "It's not just a mistake," she said. "It's a matter of whether or not you're willing to respect the process and pay attention to the details. If you're not careful, this could become a bigger issue." There was a moment of silence, and in that silence, Jasmine could feel the tension building. The other diners, who had been quietly observing, now seemed to take notice of what was unfolding. Jasmine wasn't just talking to Mr. Richards anymore. She was making a statement, and it was a statement that was about to rock the room. Just as Mr. Richards opened his mouth to respond, the restaurant manager appeared at Jasmine's side. He had been quietly watching from the back, knowing exactly what was happening. The manager, having already been briefed by Jasmine earlier, stepped in with authority. "Mr. Richards," he said, his voice calm but firm, "it seems there's a problem with your bill. I'm afraid this won't be the first time we've had to address issues like this with you." The words hit Mr. Richards like a slap to the face. His arrogant demeanor faltered for a brief moment, and Jasmine saw it. For the first time, she saw him taken aback, unsure of how to respond. The power dynamic had shifted. He was no longer in control, and he knew it. The manager's words were not just about the mistake on the bill. They were about the history of entitlement that Mr. Richards had taken for granted, thinking he could bully his way through life without consequences. The other patrons were starting to murmur, watching the scene unfold with curiosity. Jasmine stood her ground, unwavering. She didn't need to raise her voice or make a scene. Her calm, composed demeanor was enough to make Mr. Richards realize that his behavior wouldn't be tolerated. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking around at the eyes now trained on him. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Richards wasn't the one in control. Jasmine had taken that power back, and it felt like a victory not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been treated like they were beneath others. The moment Mr. Richards was confronted by the manager, his arrogance crumbled. He knew there was no way out. The respect he had taken for granted evaporated in front of everyone. Jasmine had proven that standing up for herself wasn't about raising her voice. It was about holding her ground and making sure he understood the consequences of his behavior. As the manager escorted him out of the restaurant, the other patrons watched in stunned silence. The power had shifted, and it was clear to everyone that no one was above accountability. Jasmine had shown that in a world where some people believe they can get away with anything, a quiet, powerful response can be the most powerful revenge. If you want more stories like this, where justice is served in the most unexpected ways, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for the next incredible tale.